Welcome back. In our top business story, the UAE remains committed to the dirham's peg to the US dollar, despite the dollar's currently low value against many major currencies. The peg is steady and consistent despite US lawmakers quarreling over the country's debt limit, the UAE central bank was quoted by Bloomberg. Despite the fact that its foreign reserves are mostly denominated in US dollars, they are invested mostly in non-US assets, an official said. Also, due to the low interest rates, the central bank doesn't hold any US treasuries or other financial papers issued by the US government. Both the UAE and Saudi Arabia peg their currencies to the dollar. Sura Real Estate today reported a second quarter net profit 4 times as large as last year's and plans to invest over 1 billion dirhams into its existing projects by the end of the year. Abu Dhabi's second largest developer by market value posted a net profit of 125 million dirhams. This compares to only 31 million dirhams a year earlier, and it delivered more units and reduced bad debt provisions. Already in the first half of the year, Sura Real Estate invested 1.4 billion dirhams in its projects and plans to invest the same amount again in completing and delivering more units to its customers. That put the shares under pressure today. Sura's focus is on project delivery and good results are expected for the year-end. Richard Amos, the country's chief financial officer, told Reuters. Could Dana Gas possibly be a takeover target? According to the Financial Times, the Abu Dhabi-listed oil and gas company has emerged as one of the possible bid targets for the Valaris investment vehicle. The market seems to believe so as the shares are rallying on the news today. The FT said that representatives of both companies have met in recent months. However, a formal approach hasn't yet been made. Valaris, which went public on the London Stock Exchange last month and is an acquisition vehicle owned by the former CEO of BP, Tony Hayward, is said to be mostly interested in Dana Gas upstream gas assets in Egypt and Kurdistan. According to Reuters, Valaris is mainly eyeing oil and gas acquisition targets in emerging markets. Despite a few exceptions like Dana Gas, shares in the UAE traded mainly lower today, and also the majority of the GCC's benchmarks ended on a negative note. And in our world business news, Asian stocks fell today, weighed down, among other things, by the sharp drop in US markets late yesterday. The Nikkei fell 1.5%, Australia's benchmark index, the ASX 200, 1.6%, and China's broad market barometer, the CSI 300, lost 0.6%. Not only are first quarter earnings for Japan's consumer electronics firms seen sharply down due to the March earthquake, but more so, international investors are viewing the prospect of a US default and subsequent credit downgrade to have a large impact on the stability of the world's financial markets. And not only that, rating agency Standard & Poor's lowered Greece to CC and said the country will partially default once European officials implement a second bailout plan, a deal that will see bondholders shoulder part of the costs. And to talk about all this further, we're now joined by Bruce Powers, Head of Research at Trust Securities. Welcome, Bruce.
Good to be here.
With this whole debt issue looming over the markets, what do you think will happen in the next coming days, looking at the stock markets?
Well, there are really 2 issues of importance. One is raising the debt ceiling, and the second is coming up with a plan to reduce the deficit. Even if the debt ceiling is raised, the rating agencies may lower the U.S.'s AAA rating if there's not a credible deficit reduction plan. Now, in the increased uncertainty, we've seen gold and silver strengthened and the dollar weakened. If this situation is resolved in the next couple of days, I'd expect those 2 trends to reverse, and we may also see a short-term rally in oil. This will prevent another buying opportunity for investors in precious metals as it pulls back a little bit lower. Eventually, though, I would expect the long-term trends to return as the recovery in the U.S. and Europe is still weak and likely to get worse, I believe. As far as German bonds, I think they're a good alternative to treasuries, and the market is already pricing them in as a safer alternative. Also, as far as currencies go, the Swiss franc will probably remain the safest currency.
Now let's look at the first story that we talked about, that the UAE stays committed to pegging to the US dollar. Why does a peg make sense? Obviously, with the dollar weak, the dirham is weak, and that makes imported goods more expensive. It heats up inflation. Why does it still make sense, the peg?
Well, an argument for the peg is that it creates a perception of stability. There's also the benefit of making UAE assets cheaper to foreign investors. Inflation right now is about 4%. That's up from 3% last year, but in 2011 it was up to 11%. So back then in 2007 there was a lot of talk about depegging, but even then with the high inflation, the policymakers decided against it. So I would expect that if the dollar continues to weaken over time and inflation rises significantly, we'll see much more calls for depegging again. But for right now, it looks like it's here to stay. Keep in mind also that the dollar, or weakening dollar, is only one part of inflation, although an important part.
That's true, certainly. If you go to the supermarket, obviously. Thank you very much, Bruce. Have a good weekend. Ford plans to build a $900 million production plant in India. With that, the US car maker is doubling its investment in Asia's third largest economy. Ford plans to set up the factory in the Gujarat state in western India to profit from the second fastest growing auto market in the world. Car sales in India jumped 30% in the year to March to around 2 million vehicles. Ford's new plant is expected to start producing cars in about 3 years, 240,000 vehicles each year, and will employ around 5,000 people, the company told Reuters. That brings Ford's total capacity in India to 600,000 cars. Before we go, here's a quick overview of the oil and currency markets, and after that we have the day's sports news for you.